A gute Woche. Let us begin the Farbrengen this afternoon that today is Shabbos HaGodl. And regarding Shabbos HaGodl, there's a siman in Shulchan Aruch which discusses the halachas of Shabbos HaGodl. We find it in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, we find it as well in the Shulchan Aruch of the Beis Yosef prior to that, and as the Rebbe mentioned the Beis Yosef, the Rebbe right away reminded us again that this year is 500 years since the birth of the Beis Yosef. And in their Shulchan Aruch, it is explained regarding Shabbos HaGodl. In fact, the keppel, in other words, the heading of the siman, is also regarding the dinim of Shabbos HaGodl. What actually is Shabbos HaGodl? As it's explained in Halacha, in Shulchan Aruch, mentioning the word Shulchan Aruch, the Rebbe says this is the name which Yidden are referring to this sefer for many, many years, and the meaning of the sefer is simply as it sounds. Shulchan Aruch means a set table. We find in Rashi in the beginning of Parshas Mishpatim, where Rashi explains the pasuk ve'ela mishpatim asher tasim lifneihem, that these laws have to be put in front of us. The Rebbe is telling Moshe regarding the Mishpatim. So there Rashi explains also the same minyan, that Torah has to be related to Yidden in a way just like a table that is set. In other words, everything has to be related in a very organized way so that the one who is learning Torah is receiving everything properly. Same the Rebbe says when we're talking about Shulchan Aruch, the inyan of Shulchan Aruch is not just to bring it down into Maaseh, into the action and deed of learning the Shulchan Aruch, but yet more than that, that from the learning of the Shulchan Aruch we should know how to fulfill the mitzvahs which we learn about, which are discussed in Shulchan Aruch. Getting back to Shabbos HaGodl. Shabbos HaGodl, really happened was, Lamake Mitzrayim B'fchoreim. This is an expression which we have in Tillim, the Kilo Olam Chazdois, in the 26 Kilo Olam Chazdois, which we say every Shabbos in davening. And there the pasuk uses the expression Lemake Mitzrayim B'fchoreim. The Mitzrim were plagued from amongst their own Pchorim. What does this really mean? Because when the Yidden prepared for Korban Pesach, and everyone took the sheep and tied them to the legs of their beds, and this happened several days before Pesach, it aroused an anger amongst the Mitzrim, because sheep, this was the Avodah Zarah of Mitzrayim. So the Mitzrim were very angry, and they wanted to stop the Yidden from doing what they wanted to, in other words, from going in to slaughter their Avodah Zarah. However, the Pchorim of the Mitzrim, they were already aware of Moshe Rabbeinu's message that the Rebbe is going to plague Mitzrayim. How? By killing all the firstborns. So the firstborns of the Mitzrim, they did not mind that the Yidden were taking their Avodah Zarah and later ultimately were going to slaughter it as long as that they remain alive. So what it actually led to was a kind of an inside war in Mitzrayim internally between the Pchorim and the regular Mitzrim. That's the Taich, Lemake Mitzrayim B'fchoreim. How were the Mitzrim hit? With their Pchorim. In other words, the Pchorim and the Mitzrim were in a war amongst themselves. The Pchorim not minding that the Yidden are using the Avodah Zarah of Mitzrayim and are going to slaughter it in a few more days. However, the average Mitzri was angry why the Yidden are taking their Avodah Zarah and they're going to kill it. Something which they worship to. So Shabbos HaGodl we celebrate because of Lamake Mitzrayim B'fchoreim. We celebrate because this is the day when it happens. Explained in Shulchan Aruch in detail. It's not exactly the day. The year the Yidden were Mitzrayim, it happened 10 days in the month of Nisan. But it was not this day of miracle was not set for 10 days in the month of Nisan. Shulchan Aruch explains, because 10 days in the month of Nisan is the Yortzeit of Miriam, Moshe's sister. So rather, it was arranged that it's always the Shabbos before Pesach, Shabbos HaGodl. So this is the inyan of Shabbos HaGodl. And when we say that it is called Godol, It means the entire Shabbos is called the Shabbos HaGodel. Everything that this Shabbos gives, everything that this Shabbos offers, everything is Godel, is big. Now naturally there are the things which we do this Shabbos, which we don't do any other Shabbos. Firstly, we say Avodah Mayinu after Mincha. But really, and other than Yonim that have a shaykhs to this Shabbos, but really the Rebbe says it's much more than that. The specialty of the Shabbos is that the entire Shabbos is called Shabbos HaGodel. It's a Größer Shabbos. And this Shabbos gives bracha to the first day of Pesach. Because Shabbos gives bracha to the entire week. And next Shabbos is the first day of Pesach. Pesach in itself, the Rebbe mentions, also has the title of Shabbos. As we find in the Pasuk, when the Pasuk talks regarding Sfiras HaOmer, the Pasuk uses the expression, Usfartem lachem, you should begin counting Mimachas HaShabbos, from the day after Shabbos. And Chazal interpret what is meant by Shabbos, the day after Pesach. So Pesach in itself also has the title Shabbos. But here we are talking how Pesach, which will be next Shabbos, is receiving bracha from today, from this Shabbos. And Shabbos in general is a day of Simcha. Especially this year, it's a year of Tismach, it's a year of Hakel. And we notice that Rosh Chodesh Nisan, as well as the first day of Pesach, everything is on the day of Shabbos. And the day of Shabbos, it is mentioned in Sefri, of a Yom Simchaschem, your days of happiness. Pasuk says of Yom Simchaschem, of a Moyadechem. So the Sefri interprets, what does of a Yom Simchaschem refer to? And he says it refers to Shabbos. Elu HaShabbos. So Shabbos in itself is a day of joy. How much more so is it when we're talking about this Shabbos? The specialty of this Shabbos, that everything that has to do with this Shabbos is an inyan of Godel. What is the lesson, the moral, the Hira, which we derive from this entire inyan? The Rebbe says it's very obvious. What happened Shabbos HaGodel? What happened Shabbos HaGodel was, it introduced Getlichkeit to such a far area that even the Mitzrim and the firstborns of Mitzrayim, it's explained in the Chassidus that the firstborns, the Pchoir of Mitzrayim, this is the Madrege of Keser. We know in Chassidus Keser is a very high Madrege. However, this is Keser the Klippe. The Keser of the country, of the opposite side, the Keser on Klippe. And what are we told? That even in such far and remote area, Getlichkeit reached. Because they too realized that there is a Koyach Hashem, there's the power of the Rebishter, and it's the Rebishter who is telling the Yidden that the Yidden should take the Korban Pesach. And all this came as a result from the act of the Yidden, when the Yidden fulfilled what they were told. Mishchu v'kru lachem. Mishchu, go ahead and take the Korban Pesach and prepare it several days before Pesach. Once the Yidden did that, this led to it that even the Pchoirei Mitzrayim, who are so far from Yiddishkeit, they also got an understanding, and they also began feeling the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As far as Yidden, the Rebbe says, way back Rosh Hashanah, a half a year before Pesach, Chazal say, B'Rosh Hashanah botla avoda maviseinu. When did the Yidden stop working? The Shibud Mitzrayim. So Chazal say this happened yet in Rosh Hashanah. So actually for the next half year, the last half year that the Yidden were Mitzrayim, they were not involved laboring for the Mitzrayim. But the Mitzrayim still did not agree to let them out. Here when we are stating about this inyan, the inyan of Makas Peiros, the meaning of Makas Peiros, in other words, is that even the Pchoirei Mitzrayim realized the Koyach Hashem, the power of the Rebishter. As a lesson from this is the Rebbe continuing that in all areas, how far choil it may be, how vachadik it may be, how far weekday it may be, in other words, areas which may seem to us that they are totally far from Kedusha, areas that have no shaykhs to Kedusha. What does Shabbos HaGodel teach us? That even into such areas, it is our obligation to instill and bring Getlichkeit into that area, and those areas will also have a feeling and a warmth and realize the greatness of the Rebishter. In these sichos, the Rebbe also spoke again about what he's been mentioning the last couple of weeks, about contributing for Mois Chitim, making sure that every family has all their needs so that they can celebrate the Yontif of Pesach accordingly. The Rebbe again stressed that the expression is Mois Chitim. The funds that help people celebrate Pesach are called funds of wheat. And in Hebrew we know that there are various categories of wheat. There are better ones and cheaper ones. The best one, the most expensive one, is called Chitim, as opposed to Sa'irem, and there are Chameshes Minei Dagan. There are 5 categories of wheat which are all kosher for matzah. And nonetheless we see that what is the name the fund carries? Mois Chitim. Why? Because whenever we give, we help somebody, when we do tzedakah, we always have to see that the poor person gets the best. We shouldn't take an attitude, anyways, a charity, we're giving him. So as long as he'll be able to be Yetzer the mitzvah, why should I give him the best? So here the Rebbe brings a pasuk, which the Rambam brings. Rambam brings a pasuk, Kol Chelev Lashem. It's a pasuk which is taken from where the pasuk discusses karbonis. All the fats, meaning all the best, has to go Lashem. In other words, anything which we're doing for the Rebishter, for the sake of Hashem, for the sake of tzedakah, anything which we're doing along these lines always has to be from the best. The Rebbe again urged on the importance, the Rebbe has also spoken about several times lately, how a birthday should be celebrated, general birthdays. Birthday is a very opportune day, and it should have the proper celebration. I've also spoke that this week is the 14th of Nisan, Erev Pesach, is the birthday of the Rambam. The Rambam, who was the one that put together the Sefer which the Rambam put together, which is an Isef, it's a likut actually. What did the Rambam do? What the Rambam did was he compiled, he put together all Inyanim and Torah, so that we can have, as the Rambam himself writes, that a person can learn Chumash, and after learning Chumash he can go to his Sefer and he will get a complete knowledge of all the Inyanim and Torah. The Rebbe mentioned this is exactly what Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, the author of Mishnah, also did the same. What is Mishnayos? Mishnayos is also, he compiled all the halachas. It's an Inyan of a likut. He gathered and put together all inyanim that are needed in Torah, and this is what Rabbeinu HaKadosh put together, and that is what was the Mishnayos. And it came in later generations, it was the Rambam that made his Sefer. Rabbi also urged that being that Erev Pesach, 14 days in the month of Nisan, it is the birthday of the Rambam. See to it that the Rambam's birthday is also celebrated accordingly, as the day really deserves. Was later in the Maimer, the second part of the Maimer, by the Rebbe there's an expression, and the Rebbe learns that Rashi usually he uses this expression. He uses the expression a klotz kashe. A klotz means in Yiddish a beam, something which is very firm, means a klotz. What's the taich a klotz kashe? When we have a question, and it's a very solid, gesunde question, which to find an answer to it is very hard. This is usually the Rebbe's expression on a very strong and obvious question. He uses the expression a klotz kashe. So talking in the Maimah, the Rebbe was explaining, Maimah was based on Avodim Hayinu, which is the beginning of the part of the Haggadah, which we recited after Mincha. And in the Maimah, the Rebbe discussed what is explained in Chassidus, how Avodas Hashem, the proper way of Avodas Hashem, is ponim el ponim, face to face to the Rabbeinu Shalom. What is the inyan of Paroi? Paroi is an inyan of a klippe, naturally, as explained in Chassidus. But Chassidus explains at length that Paroi has the same lettering as the word oiref. Oiref in Hebrew means the back. There's a pasuk, ponu alai oiref v'loi ponim. When you want to say that the Yidden have turned away from me, the Rebishter says, he uses the expression, ponu alai oiref, they have turned their backs to me and not their faces. So what do we see from this? From this we see that the whole inyan of of paroi, of oiref, that's an inyan of turning our backs away. And that's what the klippa of paroi stands for. In other words, turning away from getlachkeit. And how do we have to dien der Eibishter? Not in a way of oiref, of paroi, but on the contrary, ponim el ponim, face to face. This is the inyan which the Rebbe was talking about in the Maimon. And it was in the latter part of the Maimon, the Rebbe says there's a klotz kasha, which means a very strong question. Here we are talking about various ways how we have to serve the Rebishter, that the Rebishter has to be served, not in a way of ponu elai oiref. But the question that really arises is, why aren't we taken out of Golus yet? It's kol hakitzin. Kate means a date when the Gula will be. The Rebbe says all these dates and promises which we were given for Gula have all passed. And even the expression of the Frierdiker Rebbe, there's an expression of the Frierdiker Rebbe that tells us that medaf zuputzen de kneplach, famous expression which the Rebbe quotes very often. It's an expression from the Frierdiker Rebbe that we're actually all like soldiers in the army. And when a soldier is in the army, his entire uniform has to be clean and orderly and spotless. Everything has to be in perfect shape. Even his buttons, the buttons on the uniform also have to have the proper shine. So the Frierdiker Rebbe expressed himself and used this expression many times that we are already at the final stage. What we're up to is to the polishing of the buttons. Everything else is already ready. It's in order so that Mashiach can come. What we only have to do, what we are lacking is the polishing of the buttons. So the Rebbe is using the expression recently. The Rebbe is saying, now we have already polished our buttons also. The buttons are also shining. Especially, Rebbe referred to, it was a time by the Frierdiker Rebbe, when the Frierdiker Rebbe arrived here in the United States. There was a very famous motto which the Frierdiker Rebbe kept on stressing: La'alter l'tshuva, la'alter l'geula. We should respond immediately to tshuva, and responding to tshuva will lead to a la'alter, to immediate geula. So the Rebbe says the Frierdiker Rebbe has proclaimed this motto already, and we have already reached to a point where our buttons are also shining. When the Rebbe spoke Beis Nissen, I think it was, Sunday night after the Rebbe came back from the Yoel, the Rebbe spoke. It was Beis Nissen, the Yortzeit of the Rebbe Rashab. The Rebbe was also on this subject referring to the expression that of the Frierdiker Rebbe medaf zuputzen de kneplach. And the Rebbe said the buttons are already shining. Not only that, the Rebbe says we see begashmias that when we take a button and you rub it too much, you over rub it, not only will it not shine, but it will break. Memela, we have reached to a point already where we are polishing the buttons. In other words, we're in the final stage, ready for the coming of Mashiach. And in other words, there's no need for any more. On the contrary, anything more is not called for, because just like Begashmias, when you over polish a button, the button does not have the strength to hold it out, and what happens usually is that the button cracks. So the same the Rebbe was referring to today, that we're already ready for the coming of Mashiach. It's kol akitzin, all these katzim, the end. A katz means an end. In other words, all these prophecies on various years that we will have Geula have already passed, and it's already the final stage at the time that Mashiach should come already. Then the Rebbe concluded that we're already in the month of Nisan. And Nisan is an Indian of Nisei Nisim. There's a Gemara. The Gemara discusses the month of Nisan. And Nisan is spelled with two nuns. So two nuns, Gemara explains this has a shaykhs to a concept of Nisei Nisim, many miracles. Today the Rebbe also explained it that two nuns are equivalent to 100. And 100 is an Indian. You know, Chazal tell us that a person is supposed to try and aim to make 100 brachas a day. And in Shulchan Aruch it's explained that to make 100 brachas a day is something which is not so complicated. However, the problem arises Shabbos. All week we have 3 Shmoneh Esreis, in which each of the 3 Shmoneh Esreis has 19 brachas. So right away we have quite a head start. 3 times 19 is 57. But But Shabbos that the Shmona Esreis do not have 19 brachas, so it's discussed in Shulchan Aruch that on Shabbos as well we are supposed to try to seek to reach to 19 brachas. I'm sorry, to 100 brachas, thank you. And it's also mentioned in Halacha that even the brachas which we hear from the one who's saying mafta, and he's saying brachas, and when we listen to his brachas, and we respond amen to the brachas, it's also credited as if we would make the brachas. Rabbi spoke here about the greatness b'chlal of an union of bracha. Every yid, everyone wants brachas, every yid asks for brachas, and brachas, especially when brachas tied in with the number of 100, number of 100 is also a very significant number. So it's something which is very meaningful. In other words, it's a very opportune time for the inyan of brachas. As it's customary in the Farbrengen, that the Rebbe explains a Rashi, the week Sedre, and also talks an inyan that has a shaykhis, to the Rambam, to the Shia Rambam of the day. Regarding the Rashi, the Rebbe explained the Rashi in the beginning of the Sedre, right at the beginning of Parshas Tzav. And what does Rashi tell us? That the expression Tzav es Aharon, Rebbe is telling Moshe, go ahead and command Aaron. So Rashi says, Tzav es Aharon, command Aaron, Ein Tzav elo loshen ziruz, miyad uledoiros. What is the expression of Tzav? Tzav is an extra type of cautioning, and it's something eternal. And Rashi goes on further. There's a need for extra cautioning where it is involved spending money. Where the Torah tells a person to spend money. And we know how dear money is to every one of us. So the Torah is cautioning us, especially that we should fulfill everything carefully and accordingly, even though it involves an expenditure of money. Which is a simple meaning in the Rashi. So the Rebbe is raising several questions. First of all, the expression Tzav, this is not the first time in the Torah we have Tzav. The word Tzav has been mentioned already earlier in the Torah. And nonetheless, Rashi passes by and does not say anything. Here, when it comes to the Tzav, here in the beginning of Parashat Tzav, Rashi raises the question and explains it. What is the explanation? That we need a special warning where it involves, we have to be cautioned, extra cautioned, where it involves spending of money. If we look into the Parsha, what is discussed here? What is discussed here is details about the cleaning of the Mizbeach, the Trumas Hadeshet. There are many other parts of Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. There are many other components of Karbanos. Nonetheless, there the Torah does not warn us with the Tzav. Here, when it involves how Aaron had to clean up the Mizbeach and take care of everything around the Mizbeach, here we get a special warning that this is something which can involve an expense, and we should fulfill it carefully as we really should. Why this expense more than other expenses? And in fact, other expenses of bringing karbanos are obviously bigger expenses. And there the Torah does not stress the expression Tzav. And why dafki here is the expression Tzav stressed? The Rebbe is referring to the inyan which the Rebbe spoke about last week. Last week the Rebbe explained the first Rashi in Parshas Vayikra, where Rashi tells us that the expression of Vayikra is an expression of love, of warmth, Lashon Chiba. And as the Rebbe explained last week, that this is a general introduction regarding whenever the Rebbe came into contact with with Moshe Rabbeinu, whether it was a dibur or an amira, as we discussed last week, whether it was a harsh type of talk or a soft type of talk or a commandment, whatever it may have been, the Rebbe always came from Hashem in an expression of love and warmth to Moshe Rabbeinu. The same way, the Rebbe says, is this Rashi here. This Rashi here comes, in other words, this Sedre here actually is coming as a continuation to Parshas Vayikra. This is all one long hemshach, where the Rebbe is telling Moshe all the details of Korbanos. when is all this taking place? This is taking place Shmini Lemiluyim. This is all happening on the day of Rosh Chodesh Nisan. On this very special day, which as discussed 2 weeks ago in the Farbrengen, this is the day that took 10 crowns. This is the day of the dedication of the Mishkan. And on this special day, the Rebishter related to Moshe Rabbeinu all the details of Korbanos. Memela the Rebbe is learning the fact of Tzav Saharin, which is mentioned here. And Rashi is explaining that the expression of Tzav is an extra cautioning where it involves an expenditure of money. This doesn't refer specifically and particularly only to this inyan of Trumas Hadeshen, which is discussed here at the beginning of Parshas Tzav. This is also a general rule on the entire Parsha of Korbanos, which is discussed in Parshas Vayikra, the entire Parshas Vayikra, and the entire Parshas Tzav, which both of them deal with all the various levels of Korbanos, which were only possible to be brought in the Mishkan. So the Torah is using here the expression of Tzav, that we should know that by any type of an expense, which is only needed for the Mishkan, and usually the nature of a person is that when it comes to spend money, a person usually thinks twice, and money is very precious to a person. So that is why the Torah is telling us, Tzav, be careful and fulfill the mitzvah properly, even though it involves an expenditure of money. But the way the Rebbe is learning is that this inyan of Chazarah Kis, which Rashi is stressing, an expenditure of funds, this does not apply only to these couple of psukim which are discussed here at the beginning of Parshas Tzav. This is a general instruction which Rashi is giving us regarding these two sedres, the entire Vayikra and the entire of Tzav, which both of these sedres, in fact, as we go on, Shmini even has been spoken on the same day. Vayhi Bayoyim HaShmini, it was on the 8th day, which is next week's sedre. How does Shmini begin? So the 8th day, the 8th of when? So Rashi tells us it's the 8th Lemiluyim. They began the Miluyim Chav Gimel, 23 days in the month of Adar, and here, Rosh Chodesh Nisan, this is the day when they are celebrating, as Rashi tells us at the beginning of Parshas Shmini, they are celebrating the dedication of the Mishkan. Memele, this expression of Tzav, which is used here in Parshas Tzav, is a general introduction to all the inyanim of Korbanos which are discussed in last week's Sedra, and this week's Sedra, and even going on into Parshas Shmini. Naturally, the moral which we can derive from this, interesting, since the passing of the Rebbetzin, I think we mentioned it last week, but always the Rebbe stresses Hirois, lessons, morals which we can derive from all of this, and particularly in Hamaisa Hu Ha'ikar, as the Rebbe always keeps on stressing, it is Maisa, it is deed that supersedes everything, which we have to be careful in, and take lessons from everything, take lessons from all in Yonim, and that these lessons should be brought down into reality, into Maisa. It is since, for the last 6 weeks, in other words 5 weeks, that the Rebbe is using the expression, whenever he's looking for a hiroah, he's using the expression v'hacha yiten el liboy, famous expression which the Rambam explains, which the Rebbe is using since the very first mincha of Shiva. The Rebbe is using the expression, it's a pasuk which is brought in Rambam regarding when one passes away. V'hachai yiten el liboy, the ones alive should give it to their hearts. In other words, should think into. In other words, it's a call for tshuva. It's a call for a person to reevaluate himself, to do a proper calculation where he's standing, what he's accomplished, what should he accomplish further, and so forth. This is the expression v'hachai yitein el liboy, and the ones alive, the lebediker yitein el liboy, should take it to his heart. This is the expression which is used very often by the Rebbe throughout Farbrengens. And the v'hachai yitein el liboy, in other words, the lesson from this inyan is also extremely obvious. The lesson is that Rashi here stresses the importance of zrizus, that when we do a mitzvah, any inyan in Kedusha we come into contact with, we should do it fast. We shouldn't postpone. It should be done immediately. We should respond immediately. And in fact, Rebbe mentioned here what the Alter Rebbe writes. The Alter Rebbe raises the question, he makes such a great issue about Avraham Avinu, who responded to the call of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that when he told him, take your only son and go ahead and slaughter him, Avraham responded and he was willing to do it. So the Alter Rebbe raises the question that we see throughout Jewish history, many people, thousands of people, that went on Mesiras Nefesh and gave their lives, even though they did not get the call directly from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, personally from the Rebishter. And if so, why is there such a big issue made with the Mesiras Nefesh of Avraham? And the Alter Rebbe responds that mainly what stands out in the dedication of Avraham Avinu is the zrizus, that Avraham Avinu reacted right away. He did not think twice. His response to the Rebishter was immediately. As the Alter Rebbe uses the expression in Igeres HaKodesh, zrizuse da Avram, the zrizus, the fast response of Avram, hisha amdalanu, this is the merit that has merited us, children of Avram, all Yidden as children of Avram. Avram is the Av, he's one of the Avos, one of our fathers. So, Mamelem, getting back to our Indian, what is the lesson which we have to derive from this? To realize the importance that any Indian of mitzvah, we have to respond to it in the form of zrizus, immediate response, not to postpone it, not to delay it. We could do it tomorrow, we could do it a day later, or a week later, or whatever. It's brennt nicht, as the expression is in Yiddish, can do it later. So what does the Rashi here stress? Something that has to be done in a way of zrizus, immediately. Talking about Parshas Tzav, which talks about the fire of Korbanos, the Eish that was on the Mizbeach, the Rebbe mentioned what Chassidus interprets on this inyan. Chassidus compares the Eish of the Mizbeach to the Ahava, which is within every person. Every person also has an Eish, a spark of fire, a burning fire within him, and that is the love that every Jew possesses to the Rebishter. And the Rebbe brought a taich from the Alter Rebbe on this week's Sedre. Pasuk says, Eish Tomei Tukat ala Mizbeach, a constant fire should be burning on the Mizbeach, Loi Sichpe, it should never be extinguished. So there's a taich from the Alter Rebbe. Eish Tomei Tukat ala Mizbeach. Person is also compared to a Mizbeach. And we are supposed to have a constant fire within us. And this fire, loy sichpe. This fire has to extinguish the loy, the nisht. In other words, the negative part that's within us. The nisht, in other words, the one who is telling us always not to do, and the one who's interfering with us doing all proper things, which is naturally the Yetzer Hara. What are we told? That the fire that is within us has to falesh, has to extinguish the loy. The loy is the one who is constantly telling us, no, don't do this good thing, don't do another good thing, don't go to a shir, don't do this mitzvah, don't do another mitzvah, don't give tzedakah. What are we told? That every Yid has a constant fire burning within him. There's an Eish Tamid, which is Tukat ala Mizbeach, which is constantly burning on the Mizbeach. What is the obligation of this fire, of which, as just mentioned, what is it? It's the inner love, the Ahava, the hidden Ahava which every Yid has to the Eibishter. And what is the obligation of this Ahava, of this inner fire? To extinguish the loy, to see to it that the loy, the one who's always telling us, loy, don't, should no longer be there. Another Rashi which the Rebbe brought to our attention in today's Farbrengen was the last Rashi of this week's Sedra. Last Rashi in the Sedra tells us, Vayas Aaron uvanav, that Aaron and his children did whatever they were told through Moshe. So the Rebbe says, what does Rashi say? Lahagit shvachan, it's to tell us their praise. Pasuk tells us a praise on Aaron and his children. Shaloihitu yaminus moil. They did not turn neither right neither left. They did everything exactly what the Rebishter told them to. We find a similar Rashi in Pashas Baloischa. In Pashas Baloischa, after Aaron lit the menorah, the Rebishter, Moshe, Aaron, Aaron, Moshe, 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 Aa There the pasuk also uses the expression Vayas Cain Aaron. This is what Aaron did. And there Rashi tells us Lahagit Shvochi Shel Aaron, comes to tell us the praise on Aaron, Sheloi Shino, that he did not change. He did exactly what he was told, he didn't change. What do we derive from this? That there are two inyanim. There's an inyan of not changing, and there's an inyan, what Rashi uses here, Sheloi Hitu Yomin Usmoil. They didn't turn either right or left. Seems Rebbe is learning, Sheloi Hitu Yomin Usmoil is not a major change. It's, what does Yomin Usmoil mean? What means right or left? Yamin, the Rebbe's teaching, would mean to increase. If he would increase, he would add on some things on his own. This would mean Yamin, he's leaning towards the right. What would mean Smoil? He's decreasing. He's not doing exactly what he was told. He's doing it a little, taking off a little bit. What is the inyan of Shina? Shina means a total change. The Rebbe brought comparisons in Halacha where we find where the Rambam discusses the concept of shlichus. When one appoints somebody else, an emissary, to do things in his behalf. And the Rambam explains that there are various categories when he appoints him as an emissary. An emissary has to do exactly what the Mishaleach, what the one that has appointed him, has told him to do. If he does different, then their tie is lost. In other words, he's not doing what he was told. But if he does minor changes, which really don't have any effect in the main inyan of shlichus which he was given, then his shlichus remains. The Rebbe brought examples in Halacha and explained it. Actually, by Aaron, what Rashi is telling us here is, we're not even talking about Aaron daring to change. Definitely he did not dare changing. Do different than he was told from Moshe. But even though to add on a little bit, or to cut a little bit, he didn't do that either. He did exactly Shaloi Hitu Yamin Usmoil. He wasn't noite, he didn't lean neither to the right, neither to the left. As opposed to in Parashas Ba'aloischa, which the Rebbe explained at many occasions, many siches, what the inyan of Rashi is over there. There Rashi is stressing to tell us that Aaron Taka did not make any change. He did what he was told to and he didn't change. He didn't do different. Here it's not talking about doing different. In other words, here we're talking about doing the main thing, doing properly. But as far as adding on a little bit or decreasing a little bit, even that Aaron also didn't do. But the Rebbe explained, this is only for an Aaron. For an Aaron who's listening directly from Moshe. However, people like us, there is need to add on. What's the pshat need to add on? We find in Chazal discuss at length that there's a concept of asu siyag latayra. This is the Mishnah Pirkei Avos. Right away at the beginning tells us that what the Chachamim did was they added on boundaries to Torah. What does it mean, they asu siyag latayra? There's an expression in Gemara, asu mishmeres lemishmarti. In other words, we find the Chachamim had been geyser many gzeiras. Why were they geyser these things? Why did they prohibit these things for us to do? And tell us not to do it. This is because, should we do this, then we are getting close to be over on the Issa Deraisa. So in order to make sure that we're not over on the Issa Deraisa, the Chachamim have told us to be cautious and stay a step further. The Rebbe didn't mention it, but something which is like right on the tip of my tongue, which I don't know if it's an exact example, but it fits into the days which we are in now. There's the entire concept of b'dikas chametz. We search for chametz, we burn chametz. Why are there so many details upon details which the Chachamim have added on, which are not even mentioned in the Torah? That how careful we are to be, and make sure that all the chametz is destroyed. Or nowadays we have the concept of selling chametz, but again, make sure that everything is put away and it is locked up and we have no access to it during Pesach and all of that. Why is all this? So that we should not come to eat the chametz. The Torah tells us that we are prohibited from eating chametz on Pesach. We are prohibited from coming into contact with chametz on Pesach. So in order to make sure that we adhere and fulfill this mitzvah accordingly, the Chachamim have added on many gzeiros. It's called a gzeirah. In other words, the Chachamim told us, don't do this, particularly by chametz, because chametz is something which a person is used to all year round, and something which we come into contact with all year round. So the Chachamim have given us a whole group of halachas, which the Chachamim added on, how cautious we are to be, to make sure that the chametz is cleaned up properly and stored away properly, and everything is done properly. Why so many details? So that we should not come to be either under Issa min HaTorah, which tells us, Lo yirah lecha chametz v'lo yimotze lecha chametz. Bal yirah and bal yimotze. However, when we're talking about a person who was in the caliber of Aaron, getting back to this Inyan, Aaron did not need to turn to his right, neither to his left. In other words, Aaron did not even need to add on any precautions to make sure that he does it properly, because we're talking about a person, Aaron HaKohen, who heard it directly from Moshe Rabbeinu. Talking about people on different levels. So by Aaron it was lo yihita, he didn't turn neither yamin, neither smile. Another meaning which the Rebbe spoke about in the Farbrengen was he explained the shiurim of Rambam. Before we begin talking about the learning of the Rambam, he says there are those that, the Rebbe uses the expression, te'ena heim mevakshim, they are looking for kindness, they are searching for complaints. One of their complaints, that by Chassidim it was really not acceptable to learn Nigla on Shabbos. We know there's Pnimius HaTorah and there's Nigla the Torah. And Chassidim always have stressed in Shabbos the importance of learning Pnimius HaTorah. So first of all, the Rebbe says, we stress the importance of learning Pnimius HaTorah, but at the same time, we also learn Nigla on Shabbos. The Rebbe says that he's heard from the Frierdiker Rebbe, who has related about his father, the Rebbe Rashab, that the Rebbe Rashab had a kviyas and a shia which he would learn daily, and this kviyas applied to involved Shabbos as well, and it was a kviyas in learning Nigla on Shabbos. Furthermore, the Rebbe says we don't have to go to search what we heard from the Frierdiker Rebbe about the Hanhage, about the attitude of his father, about the conduct of his father, the Rebbe Rashab. We are told, we were instructed by the Frierdiker Rebbe to learn shiurim of chitas daily. And we were learning shiurim of chitas. Chitas is chumash, tehillim, and tanya. And the chumash that we learn, we have to understand exactly what we learn. We have to understand the pshat. Even though the Alter Rebbe tells us in halachas of Talmud Torah that if one does not understand the pshat, he's allowed to learn it. But still the mitzvah of Talmud Torah we fulfill. We fulfill the mitzvah of Talmud Torah when we understand what we are learning. And understanding Chumash properly in the realm of Pshat of Pshutish al-Mikra, understanding the Pshat of what we are learning. Understanding Chumash properly goes into the category of learning Nigla. And nonetheless, we were told that we have to do this every single day, even Yom Kippur, every day of the year, the Rebbe says. So in Mela, definitely, we learn Chassidus Tak on Shabbos, but at the same time, Pnimius HaTorah. But at the same time, Shabbos, we should also, and we have to also learn Nigla the Torah as well. And in the Inyan which the Rebbe brought to our attention in the Shir of the Rambam, is a halachic issue which the Rebbe discussed, and that's the concept of Dvarim Shebeleiv Einam Dvarim. In other words, the halachas which we are learning in Rambam today, it's the halachas of Kiddushin. When one is Mekadesh and Isha. And the halachas by Kiddushin are that the one who's Mekadesh and Isha has to say out very clearly that he's Mekadesh this and this woman to be his wife. And the Rambam stresses that there is no such thing as words which are Dvarim Shebeleiv. In other words, words which are not spelled out clearly, there's no such thing in existence. Everything has to be said out clear and precise. And the Rebbe used the expression Beloshn Tzacho Brura, in a very clear expression. However, we find another halach in the Rambam. If they were involved in discussing a marriage, this is the inyan which they discussed. And all of a sudden, the man takes out something to be her mekadesh, let's assume a ring or another item of value, and gives it to the wife, even to the woman, even though he doesn't spell out clearly that he's giving it for Kiddushin. But being that this is the inyan which they are discussing, what they are discussing is Kiddushin. So the Rambam paskins the halacha that when they are asukim ba'isa inyan, the Rebbe says there are many similar halachas which apply by Kiddushin and apply by Gerushin as well. In halacha, the concept of Kiddushin and the concept of divorce have many equal halachas. In Gemara, it's derived from similar expressions which we find by Kiddushin and we find by Gerushin. So the Gemara says that we compare many of the halachas. But nonetheless, we see that at times we do rely on the concept of words that are not spelled out, and still they do carry a validity. For example, this halacha which the Rebbe is mentioning, the halacha of when they are discussing an inyan of marriage. The marriage is being discussed, not specifically stressing that he is marrying her right now and he's being her mekadesh right now. And though at the same time he will go ahead and take out something of value and give it to the woman, this is an indication that he is out to be her mekadesh, and by her taking it, she's accepting kedushin. So, to a degree, this is Dvarim Shebelev. In other words, words which are kept in the heart and are not spelled out clearly. And nonetheless, halacha, as the Rambam discusses in today's Shia, nonetheless, here we do go out of the klal. Outside of the klal of saying Dvarim Shebelev Einam Dvarim, and we do accept these Dvarim, even though there are Dvarim Shebelev and they are not spelled out clearly. The Rambam says this is an inyan which is room to be discussed. Tein lachacham v'yechkam oy, the Rebbe has an expression, leave it up to the wise, just bring it to his attention. And leave it up to the wise, and he will dwell in it and become yet wiser, yet more intelligent. The Rebbe is just like alerting us on this inyan, which is something which requires explanation, which is something which is worthy to look into. Agutavach. Do have here with me mashke from the Rebbe. First of all, it's always a good time to say l'chaim. Secondly, the Rebbe, it's before Yir Aleph Nissen. And this is mashke which I have from the Rebbe from Eitzoy Semches Teire, which I always get from the Rebbe for this Shia. Especially that we are right before Yir Aleph Nissen. The Rebbe just spoke the greatness of celebrating birthday. And it is the birthday of our Melech, our leader. It's an appropriate time that we all get together and say l'chaim. And Take, as the Rebbe spoke when he spoke a few weeks ago on celebrating birthdays, Take explained and he elaborated that on a birthday, Take, we get together and we Take express a wunsch, a wish to the one whose birthday it is. And I feel I'm talking in everybody's name. Doesn't mean everybody can say it again. But we Take expressing wishes from the bottom of our heart to the Rebbe as first and foremost. Soll sein gesund und stark. The Rebbe should be well and healthy. And that the inyan which the Rebbe is stressing at so many occasions, which as we see it is his real desire to bring Mashiach and take us all out of Gullus, should come true. Take immediately. We are in the month of Nisan, Benisan, Nigalu, Benisan Asidin Leigoil. It's the most appropriate time for Giyula. L'chaim, l'chaim. L'chaim, l'chaim.